So I'm originally from Ghana. I did my undergrad studies at the University of Ghana, and that is in the capital. And during my undergrad years, I spent a year abroad in what was the Soviet Union at the time. At the time that it was going through significant change. Folks will remember glasnost and perestroika, and that was at the height of that. And so I was able to see the old and the new. It was an opportunity also to mingle with a lot of students from around the world because the institute that I stayed at, that I studied at, has students from pretty much every part of the world, there. From my undergrad days, I pursued graduate work in communications at the University of Ghana, again, before moving to the University of British Columbia to study in political science, ending up at Queen's where I did my PhD. But going back to my days in Ghana, I grew up in a very diverse community in the city. It was what would be considered a low-income environment, but it was a very vibrant community where you learned a lot about what it means to be there for one another, to support one another. Understood that people could work hard, but may not necessarily get a lift in life. And so the understanding of hard work, community, support for one another, and the ethos of social justice, which is something that has lived with me through my life, came from that experience. And so so that gives you some sense of that background. That is one of the easiest questions that I get asked because, my mom has been, my compass for a whole lot of things in my life. She never had a formal education, but she strongly believed in education, supported all the children through that. She, for me, epitomizes hard work and commitment to community. She, supported all of us. I have 6 siblings. But that was not the size of the family because pretty much every kid in the neighborhood, came to our home, right? And I had a lot of cousins whose formative years were in our home. So that, experience for me was critical to who I am in terms of the values that I hold. People knew her for very strong ethical principles. She spoke her mind. She instilled in us a responsibility for others. And I remember as a kid, people would come home and there'd be stuff that we have in the house and she'll give them out to people and we're like, hey, why, But we always had, for example, one of the things that I remember was she saying, we always had leftover food because she said you never knew who might show up in the middle of the night and need, that. I remember a colleague that I met here in Canada who was telling me about his experience in Ghana. I never knew he grew up in that neighborhood, and he was telling me about how his uncle, whom he visited during the holidays, would go to my mom's place and have, borrow, food because she sold different kinds of foodstuffs and so on, right? And that is a story that we hear quite a lot about. And so I think in terms of what my core values are about, openness, responsibility for others, freedom of expression, because she did speak her mind a lot. All of those things came from there. And the principle of fairness was another thing that she stood for. And she would challenge people on those kinds of things. And so for me, when I look up to somebody who is formative in terms of my own ideas and so on, it's her. And so she continues to be a very strong influence, and even though she passed, quite a while ago, continues to define who I am. My research straddles, I would say, 4 broad areas, which are interconnected, and I'll explain that in a bit. A significant part of my work has been on media and politics in Africa. And again, it comes from this idea that people need to be able to speak their mind, and it's only through a confluence of ideas that you're able to move society forward. And so in an environment where media freedoms were constrained, I had a particular interest in exploring how those were inimical to development in different ways. but also beginning to open up vistas to how people might see the world through those mechanisms. So it's something that has always been of interest to me. So that is one piece of the work that I do, and I also then work on democratization and new technologies and how those are being appropriated to advance democracy and citizen engagement. Again, in the African context, because my regional focus is Africa, right? So I tend to do a lot of my work in that context. And then a third area would be on diasporas and transnational citizenship. So again, issues around voice and how diaspora communities are able to still connect with their places of residence, but also with place of origin, and how that transnational interaction influences politics both here, and the focus is on mainly African Canadians, but also influences their place of origin. And then the final area that I've also been active in, which again intersects diaspora technology and in this case higher education, is looking at how diaspora communities can advance education in Africa, particularly in a context where there's brain drain, right? And so I'm an example of somebody who is supported by taxpayer dollars in Ghana and has left. And so I feel a commitment to give back, and I've led initiatives that mobilize the community of academics and diaspora to see how we can give back to those places and help them build capacity. So in a nutshell, those are my broad areas of scholarship, and I continue to look at how they intersect in different ways. It's important as academic leaders that we operate from a principle of service. And I've always seen that as my motivation for engaging in academia and academic administration in particular. And so, I see myself as facilitating opportunities for people to be great at what they do, because my colleagues from staff, students, and faculty are folks with a huge dose of potential. And my responsibility is to make sure they can unleash that in ways that are beneficial to society, but also brings them a sense of fulfillment, right? And so I think that in doing that, I've tried to work with colleagues to have them understand that I'm there for them, that I'm at their service in a way. I look at myself as a servant leader, and so that principle is, guided the way I do things. And I've found that if you're open, transparent, and engaging, people latch on to that because there's a sense of inclusion, there's a sense of fulfillment that you're participating in defining your own world, as it were, right? So that has been critical to me in terms of how you mobilize the community for common purpose. There are a variety of reasons why having an inclusive community is important. We feed off one another, we bring different strengths, we enrich who we are as humans, but also as a community. I think if you live in an isolated world where you don't tap into the potentials that others have, you effectively erode your own potential, right? And so I see no downside to being inclusive. I think that having people participate in decision-making processes that impact them only makes the proposals that we put forward better. If you've got people invested in that, they'll stand behind it, they'll push it, they'll become the champions of these efforts. So I think it's absolutely critical that we look at it from that perspective in terms of the benefits that come not to just us as individuals, but to our community as well. And so I sometimes take issue where people talk about equity seeking people. I think that people are equity deserving, and that we have to be able to create room for those folks to be able to engage in the process. And when we do that, we expand our horizons, we enrich our own experiences, and we're able to open pathways for people who would otherwise not have the opportunity to be part of our community. But pleasantly feel reinforced in my perception of this campus from a distance, because my attraction to this place came from a distance, right? And so being able to immerse myself in this environment over the last couple of days and having a reinforcement of the beliefs and the perception that I have has been really refreshing. Because as you can imagine, it'd be really scary to come here and realize there's a disconnect between what I thought and what I experienced. So I found this campus to be very engaging. Just cast your eyes and you see, we were talking earlier about inclusivity and diversity, and it just manifests in this environment, right? Talking to colleagues, I feel a passion here to be able to make a contribution that goes beyond this campus, and looking at this campus as boundless and borderless, and reaching out to our community both here and beyond. So that is the sense I get, right? So for me, it's a good fillip to, my desire to be able to be part of this community and be able to make my contributions, because there's already a foundation of people who are committed to these significant values that I hold dear. So good impression. I just hope that they're not just first impressions, but they're sustained over time, right? And I'm looking forward to working with the community. But I hope that people see me as, open, approachable, that they're able to speak their minds. I encourage them to be critical of my ideas, just as I would be of them, because I think that it's through those open, candid conversations that we're able to make this intellectual community what it is meant to be. So I hope people don't see a distance between me and them. As much as possible, I try to do my part to make sure that distances shrink as much as humanly possible. And I hope that people will see that and be able to engage with me in the same spirit. I'm all for accountability. I think that as leaders, we have a responsibility to the community that we serve to be answerable. I think that every decision I make has to be justified to the people that I serve. And I hope people will understand that and feel free to be able to ask me to account for my stewardship, here. But, I believe in respecting one another in this community. I'll extend that respect, and I hope that people will do that. I think if we engage, collaboratively and fruitfully with respect, that we all end up in a better place. So those would be some broad things that I'll throw out, and hope that, they reflect what others might think about me as well. But it's always a difficult thing. My belief is that you prove it to people by your actions, and that I hope that the community itself will form its impression of me as they begin to know me better.